So hopefully that will provoke some questions.
What do you propose to do with the professors in the that are teaching this theory and
I propose to argue them into the ground. I don't propose to do anything violent to them. Although, you know, it's tempting sometimes. But I think that one of the problems we have in academia is tenure. I think tenure is a corrupt institution. And that's not because I didn't get it. I think it makes it impossible it makes it very difficult to instigate change, particularly any kind of more revolutionary change. But there's no shortcuts. There's no way to do this. The only way to do this is slow education. I travel around the country giving talks on campuses. I view that as my most important audience. So to try and provide an anecdote to what their professors are telling them in the classroom. And so present them with alternative ideas and let them think and figure it out. But I don't think the other side ever gets heard on campuses these days. If you poll professors, their political alliances are all, way left of center, universally, almost.
So I have a question. When did we lose this killer instinct that you're talking about? It seems like we had it up until a certain point. Was it after World War II? Or was it with the rise of political correctness and the multiplicity of lawyers that we have? In all seriousness, when in your opinion, did the slide start from what made America great to what's making America mediocre?
Well, in my opinion, the slide started, but it was a very gradual start, and I think it accelerated. The slide started in the 1890s. And we could get into lots of other issues around that, but it really started to go down with Teddy Roosevelt. But in the general slide, then it was just academics. What happened was when the American middle class, upper middle class, and particularly the American wealthy, when they wanted to send their kids to university, they didn't send them, some of them sent them to Harvard and places like that. But in those days, it was very prestigious to send them to Berlin and to Paris and to Frankfurt. So they went over there, and when an American university wanted to hire a name in philosophy or in the social sciences, they went to Europe and they brought their professors over here. So what did they bring? They brought a corrupt, collectivistic, altruistic philosophy from Europe to the United States. They brought the philosophy that has caused Europe to fight among each other and to destroy each other for generations and for thousands of years. They brought them here, and you can see that domination in American universities with the first in American universities European starting in about the 1880s, 1890s, the turn of the century. I think we deteriorated in terms of self-defense. I think even in World War II. Now I'm not a military historian, but just my general sense, I guess, from movies. Now again, this is not definitive history, but that's my sense. Eisenhower was less, I think, a military genius than he was a politician who could manage a coalition of forces. I think that our weakness was reflected again in the Korean War, when I think we could have solved a big problem we had with communism. I think we could have solved it then, as MacArthur wanted us to do, and as Truman didn't allow him to do. But it's all gradual. It takes little steps, and of course Vietnam, I think, was a big leap downwards. As soon as we, now in my opinion, we shouldn't have been there. But once we were there, you either win the war or you leave. You don't do the kind of war that we had there. And as soon as we left Vietnam, a sense of pacifism evolved in the United States. We didn't want war anymore. We didn't want to get involved in conflict. We didn't see enemies anywhere. And that's where we are, I think, today still. We're recovering from that today. So it's a gradual.
Having listened to your presentation and your suggestions, the interesting thing is, the enemy is more than just radical Islam. It is also the intellectuals in the educational establishment. But it also sounds like, well, how about the folks that are in the media? Also, this type of mindset that is in our very government itself. How are we as individuals supposed to go up against this?
That's a good question. Well, in my view, and this is why I focused on the university, In my view, it starts at the universities and it can end at the universities. That is, I explained the trickle-down theory of universities. I think it works. Every professor, and I was a professor for many years, every professor sees hundreds of students a year. He has an impact on their lives, especially if he truly believes in something. At least as a professor, I'd like to believe it. So it needs to start at the university. So things that you can do as an individual. Speak up when you hear things that you think are wrong. Say, I think that's wrong. And you know, before those things become so embedded in the culture that everybody just assumes that they're right because everybody says they're right. I don't know, something like global warming. You know, I don't know if global warming is real or not. There's contradictory evidence, put it mildly. So anytime somebody says, well, it's because global warming, I said, well, I don't really believe in global warming. Just to let them know that there's such an opinion out there. There are crazy people who don't believe in this. It's important to let people know what you believe. It's important to let people know that there are voices that are different than the status quo. So that's one. Second, pick carefully where you send your kids to school. Third, think about when your university calls you because you're an alum for a donation, think about whether you want to give them money. Do you want to train the next generation based on who's teaching and who's doing the training? If you have enough money to have some clout, say, I'd be willing to give you money, but do you teach this? Do you have some professors who have this point of view? I'd really like the money to go to their program. Or if you're giving money, give it to the engineering school that is relatively value-filled, though there too. It's infiltrated every aspect. Business schools, which I've experienced with because I was a finance professor of all things, have some of the most vehement anti-business professors anyway. So, the professional schools are not immune from this. But I think the most important thing you can do, is speak, make your voice heard. And I know particularly how frustrating it is because you don't have much power as an individual.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. However, I do take exception to something you said over and over as part of your premise, and that's that reason and faith are incompatible. My faith is based on logic, reason, facts, common sense. So what do you mean by that?
I knew this would come up, and it's a tricky question. I truly believe that faith and reason are incompatible. That is, I don't believe that your faith is based on logic and facts and so on. And I think that people who are consistent in their faith always say, at some point, it's not about the evidence of the senses. It's not about what I see, what I observe, what I understand from reality. At some point, it's a pure act of faith. And that point is different for different people. But ultimately, it comes down to that point. Now, I believe that is dangerous. That at that point, you're giving yourself up. You are eliminating reality as the arbitrator of truth and falsehood. And if you have in your system the premise that is possible, that sometimes I'm not going to take my senses, reality into account, then that can, and in history has often, gotten out of control. Thomas Aquinas, who is, I think, the savior of Western civilization, tried to do that. He wrote a long treatise, which he never finished, which I think is no mistake, on trying to unite reason and faith. I don't think he succeeded. I don't think he thought he succeeded. I think that's why he stopped, and some say went crazy. Muslim philosophers tried for generations. There's the whole history of Muslim philosophy is Aristotelian scholars trying to unite reason and faith, not trying, and then at some point deciding it can't be done and dumping reason. Whereas I think what the Christians did was implicitly, not explicitly, but I think they dumped faith. And I think that's what explains the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a revolt against faith, and ultimately the Enlightenment is more so than any other period in history, and the Enlightenment is what led to the Industrial Revolution and to America. So I truly believe those are incompatible. It's hard to prove that they're incompatible. It requires to a large extent introspection. But I believe reason states that every conclusion that you come to has to be based on facts and reality. Every conclusion you come to. Faith says there's at least one conclusion that does not rely on facts of reality, and therefore they're incompatible.
Well, I totally disagree with you.
That's fine. I'm not surprised. Yes.
In your speech, you said that the United States should either wage hostilities or divorce ourselves from Saudi Arabia, Syria, Palestine State, and Iran.
Yeah.
How do you propose that we prepare for such a thing? How do we get there, as well as prepare for the result of that, going against the militant Islam?
I don't think there's, did everybody hear the question? I don't think there's much preparation required. I don't believe we have to do it all at once, put it that way. I think that our first and foremost target should be Iran. Because as I said, I think that's the intellectual base, the spiritual center of fundamentalist Islam. And therefore, I think that will send the strongest message. I actually think that a lot of these other regimes will collapse if we take out Iran from their own inertia, because they will take us seriously for once. Saudi Arabia, granted, is trickier, because it is not only supposedly an ally, but it has all this oil. But I don't really think it's that tricky, because as I've said, we have forces in Saudi Arabia right now. If we had to, we could take over those oil, the pipelines and the refineries and the ports. I don't think it's that, militarily, I don't think it's a big deal. Again, I'm not a military expert. Somebody turned off the light.
Last time.
So I don't think it's that difficult. I think that if we do it one at a time, we set ultimatums, we set dates in which countries have to perform by. I think that once the Arab world realizes we are really serious about it, we're not kidding around. We're not dropping food packages and bombs. We're not sending some ground troops, but not really enough to do the job. We're not threatening you out, but not really doing anything. We're not trying to be friends with Syria and Saudi Arabia and all these countries. But we're truly committed to routing out this enemy. I think many of them will just fold. I think Syria will start cracking down on Hezbollah. Because the Syrian tyrant Assad, or Assad's son, doesn't care about fundamentalist Islam. He's an atheist. So is, by the way, Saddam Hussein. They don't care about militant Islam. They use the Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and the Hamas as tools to prod Israel or to prod the West into giving. But if we make it clear that if they continue to use this tool, they're going to be out of power, well, what do they value more? The Hezbollah or being in control? There's no doubt they value being in control more. They'll crack down the Hezbollah and they'll eliminate it if they really believe we'll go after them. The same, now Saudi Arabia again is more difficult because they have the Wahhabi is an Islamic philosophy. Again, it's a militant form of Islam that believes that Islam will take over the world. But the Wahhabi philosophy is so integrated into Islamic life, I think it's one of the few countries in the Middle East that has no secular opposition. There is nobody in Saudi Arabia who could replace the current regime. That is a tricky one. And maybe we'd have to have troops there for a long time to secure our supply. But I think it's worth committing those troops for that sake, and I think we have every right to do so. Yeah, in the back. Oh, I'm sorry. The mic is here.
We'll have to bring this formal, and some of us have to go to another meeting. Obviously, anybody who wants to stay and continue to get your views expressed, you're more than welcome to do it. And now, my last word, remember it was St. Thomas Aquinas.
You're right. Thank you.